Okay, so I thought of another topic. It's kind of three topics kind of blended in together, but they all do work together that have to do with recovery from brain injury. And this is also something that I've managed largely to overcome. So I kind of really only want to talk about things that I've managed to overcome and not get bogged down in things that still cause me problems. So right after my injury happened, in 2006, I mentioned in another video, but when I came home from the hospital, I weighed 98 pounds. I'm 34 years old and I'm 5'4", and I weighed 98 pounds. Because while I was in the hospital, obviously I had a lot of muscle loss and atrophy and from just lying in the bed. And also I guess they had a hard time convincing me to eat things. And something that I have noticed is that my tastes have changed. Not significantly, but in ways that are, a little strange. But I've always been thin, and I have a lifelong habit of eating, first of all, very slowly. I eat my meals very slowly. And secondly, I only eat when I'm hungry, and I stop eating when I'm no longer hungry. I'm not really a snacker. I don't do any of those things for the most part. I'm hungry, I eat enough food to where I'm not hungry anymore, and then I stop eating. And that's just been my lifelong kind of eating habit. Well, when I came home from the hospital, I was 98 pounds, so I had lost a lot of muscle mass and a lot of weight. I had lost approximately 25 pounds just lying there in the bed. And I also no longer experienced hunger. And now I understand that there are two neurotransmitters that are involved with that, and one is ghrelin and the other one is leptin. And I believe, unless I have this backwards, please look it up if you want to verify, and if I find out that I have said it incorrectly, I'll put it in the comments. I believe the ghrelin is the one that's responsible for notifying your brain that your body is hungry and needs food. And then the leptin is the one that's responsible for notifying your stomach, notifying your brain that you have had enough to eat and that you should stop, that you've been satiated. And for the first 5 years, apparently those things just weren't working for me. Well, when I did eat, I did only eat until I was full, because I maintained my habit of eating very slowly. And but it seemed like I got full very, very quickly, probably more quickly than I should have. So it took me a really long time. I think I'm 120 now, if I'm not mistaken. Last time I weighed myself, I was 120 pounds, which is very good. I'm 5'4", so 120 pounds is a perfectly fair weight for me to be. Healthy, fair weight for me to be. But I didn't have any hunger. So what I had to do was I had to set timers and make myself eat breakfast, make myself eat lunch at noon, whatever, make myself eat something in the afternoon or the evening to make sure that I was getting enough nutrient, obviously. And it took 5 years, and then one day my husband said that he was going to go get something to eat because he was hungry, and I said, oh yeah, so am I. And we were both like, wow, oh my gosh, that's amazing, So I guess something happened in my brain, something reconnected or whatever in my brain, so that then, and from that point forward, I do fine, I think, for the most part. Sometimes I maybe don't get the signal that I need to eat as often as I need to sometimes, so there is still a habit of kind of looking at the clock and going, well, should you eat? Depending on what I'm doing, I can get very involved in things like a lot of people can, and just not think about it. But eventually those reconnections occurred, and now I pretty much eat like normal. I pretty much get, as far as I'm aware, I get all of the nutrient that I need. And like I said, I'm 120 now, which is a very fair, safe, and most of it's muscle mass. I think I don't have a lot of, I'm very thin. I don't have much excess fat or anything like that. I think it's pretty, it's pretty good. But as you can see, I'm still quite thin. But so I could weigh a little bit more. But I don't focus a lot on weight anyway. I focus on measurements. I try not to focus on weight too much. But so I had to wait 5 years for those things to kick in, and then I was still hovering right around 105 to 100 pounds, which is still very thin for me, still very light for me. And I finally, I want to say maybe it was 11 years in, 12 years in before I even got to 113 and was maintaining 113. And now I think I'm usually 120 to 125 all the time, which is, that's pretty good actually. So that took me a while. But the other thing that I have since, after I learned about the ghrelin and the leptin thing, is talking about another issue that has to do with eating and with neurotransmitters that have to do with eating, really, but is dopamine. And of course, I think we all pretty much, everybody kind of knows what dopamine is, basically, and what dopamine does. Well, prior to my injury happening, I was also an alcoholic. I wasn't a chronic alcoholic, but I was your binge variety alcoholic, and I was just that type of alcoholic where you drink one beer, you're going to drink 12 beers. You're going to drink every beer that's anywhere near you, around you, whatever, until you're completely, until you're just totally inebriated. And that was the type of alcoholic that I was. But after my injury happened, I had no, if I smelled it, like if somebody walked by me with a glass of wine, it turned my stomach. I couldn't even stand to smell it. So I didn't drink at all. I was like, ugh, it's disgusting. I can't, I don't, ugh, it's horrible. And I think those three things, the ghrelin, the leptin, and the dopamine, are very much connected. And I would say that I still am suffering from a pretty striking lack of dopamine. And of course, dopamine also has to do with wanting to eat, with feeling good and happy and satiated after you eat, with any number of things that you do. Whenever you do any kind of task, one might argue that in order to feel good about having done that task and kind of pat yourself on the back, oh yeah, good job, it's dopamine that does that gives you that kick, but it's also dopamine that causes alcoholism and whatever, or an abuse of dopamine that causes that. So what I thought, when I really thought about it, I thought, okay, well, the reason you're not able to motivate yourself to do certain things, especially because, of course, if you do have a brain injury, you're aware of the mental exhaustion that you suffer every day. You wake up in the morning and you have a certain amount of energy to give on any given day. And if you don't allocate it correctly, then by the end of the day, by the time your energy's up, which is not necessarily the end of the day, it could be an hour. You could have slept a full 8 hours and had a fantastic night's sleep, and still an hour after you wake up be completely done for. That's it, I'm finished. I can't do any more. And that's part of having a brain injury. But the dopamine helps you to be able to overcome that and to be able to say, kind of, if you will, soldier on, maybe take a little nap or whatever, and then get up and get back to, whatever it was that you were trying to accomplish. And I was unable to maintain levels of energy long enough to get most things done that I wanted to get done. And all of those things are connected to each other. The no longer being an alcoholic is a good thing, but I would argue that in my case, the only reason it happened is because I have a severe deficiency of dopamine. And unfortunately, having a severe deficiency of dopamine is a very common problem with people who have brain injuries. And it's also a very, a bad thing when it comes to motivating yourself and feeling good about things, enjoying movies or books or anything that you used to enjoy before. And I want you to understand, I'm not actually talking about depression necessarily. I'm talking about this strictly from a physical brain injury point of view. But obviously, that can be a part of it as well, and it can lead you to brain injury induced depression and pretty serious induced depression, and brain injury induced anorexia, because you're not getting that feeling of pleasure. You're not experiencing that pleasure, that feeling of accomplishment, or that feeling of safety or well-being that dopamine gives you. So in my case, it was a blessing, and in that I'm no longer an alcoholic, but in another way, it was a curse, because now I have to fight with myself to do the simplest things. So one thing that I have learned to do is, first of all, sitting in meditation really helps a lot, because when you're sitting in meditation and you're trying to focus, you can spend more time examining, things calmly, rather than being in a situation where sometimes you might beat yourself up. When you say, well, I should be happy right now, I should feel good right now, I should have the energy to do this task or whatever. When you're sitting in meditation, you don't have as many of those difficulties or those restraints that you're putting upon yourself. And what I think I've learned to do now is to examine the dopamine issue on a case-by-case basis and kind of say to myself, well, this probably has something to do with the dopamine thing. And if your brain isn't going to give you the dopamine that you need, then maybe you have to kind of just consciously pat yourself on the back and give yourself a little bit of a cheer and a pep talk. And these are things, part of the brain injury is that often you're doing things that you hadn't thought about for years. Maybe you started off thinking about them when you were a child or when you were a teenager or whatever, but then at some point they just kind of became second nature, and they became habits because they just became neural pathways, and you just started doing them automatically, or your brain started giving you that little push automatically. And now you're in a situation where you have to do it for yourself consciously, and it can be very frustrating, and it can be very difficult to get yourself in that mindset to be able to accomplish it. So that's another reason that I do recommend meditation, because when one is sitting in meditation, it's a lot more possible to just turn off all of those other things and be able to say, right now, I don't have to worry about any of that. I can literally sit here and focus on this thing. And when you're doing that, you can give yourself that pat on the back. While you're in meditation, I have learned to, you can give yourself on that pat on the back. And if you, someone had recommended in a book, I'll have to find out the title of the book, I'll probably put it in the comments or the description below, but where this was a meditation teacher who, a lot of times what you use when you're meditating is a timer that'll tell you when your time is up, or a bell. Someone will strike a bell in order to let you know that your time is up. Well, what this meditation teacher suggested was that you use a stopwatch instead, and that you have it, for instance, on your phone. I'm going to do another video specifically about brain injury and technology, but if you have your stopwatch on your phone sitting right in front of you, while you're sitting, especially if you're just beginning, it's the idea of just maybe periodically opening your eyes if you start to feel very agitated, and taking a look at the stopwatch and seeing how far you've come. When I first started doing it, a lot of times I felt like, oh, you're not even gonna, you know what I mean? It's probably only been, 30 seconds or whatever. I would open my eyes, I would look at the stopwatch, and 5 minutes had passed. Because that was another thing that got eradicated for me, was my kind of sense of time was nowhere near what it had been before. The clock was no longer in my brain. So all of those things, the dopamine, the ghrelins, the leptins, and the dopamine, all work together to make sure that you get the food that you need, or that you don't end up with what some people end up with, hyperphagia. I guess I had hypophagia, I guess is my understanding. Some people end up with hyperphagia, so that they constantly feel that they're hungry when they just ate. So it strikes me that while that's probably more, I want to say difficult, but that's probably not the best word to use, that you would, if you're suffering from hypophagia, then you certainly can take the time to tell yourself, okay, no, you need to eat, and then sit down and eat your food even if you're not hungry, and eventually those connections are going to be remade, because those are obviously their survival they're survival connections. They help keep your body alive, and your brain is in the business of keeping your body alive. That's true. So with those two things, and then realizing, well, you know what, maybe I'm just missing some dopamine that I had before, and I need to recognize it and give myself a pat on the back. Maybe eating more mindfully if you need to, eating more slowly if you need to, just changing some of those habits so that you can consciously look at it and say, okay, and not in a bad way, not like in a, well, you should be, but in a way of, well, hey, I'm really tasting this food, or I'm really, and maybe noticing I'm genuinely enjoying this food. Even though I wasn't particularly hungry when I first started the meal, now I'm actually genuinely enjoying it without any shoulds or any of that. Unfortunately, you might have to tell yourself that you really should eat, because if you don't, that's going to be a problem. But and then the other things are with the dopamine, telling yourself, oh wow, you know what, if you just are able to relax in the situation and take a few minutes, maybe you're gonna find that you can notice this like little increase. I have seen many stories about people who have brain injuries who do experience what appears to be a dopamine deficiency, and many of them say that it just lasts forever, and I still have it right now. I have to, a lot of times, I really have to kind of tell myself, no, you did do a good job on this. I have to keep going and looking at it and saying, no, you did do a good job on this. And that's probably will figure more into my video on technology and how I've used technology to help me. Some people may be aware that I use it negatively too, but regardless of that, we'll let that go. But so that was kind of what I wanted to talk about here. Again, like in the other videos, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please, go ahead and feel free to make them. I will put together a little bit more of a cohesive thought process on the technology part of it and make another video later. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. And again, if you feel that anyone can benefit from this, or if you're benefiting from it, please feel free to share this video and like and subscribe, whatever. And I appreciate your watching, and good luck.